Hi, my name is Hannah Jane Pritchett, current U of A GIST Master's student. Welcome to the University of Arizona GIST podcast. Our host is Chris Lukenbiel, and today he will be chatting with Dr. Nik Smilovsky, a professor from the ASU School of Design. Let's get started.
Hi, my name is Chris Lukenbiel, and welcome to this week's UA GIST podcast. Today we have with us Nik Smilovsky, Dr. Smilovsky from the ASU School of Design, a professor there, and also a long-term member of the geospatial community in Arizona from a number of different companies, and also an alumni from the MAS GIS program at ASU and a former adjunct professor for the GIST programs here at U of A. So he's had a lot of educational and professional background in the geospatial community. So it's great to have you with us today, Nik.
Thanks, Chris. Glad to be here.
So I'm kind of curious because you're one of the few people that I know that has done an amazing job of bridging both the academic as well as the professional community, which is really impressive for me. But I almost wanted to start this kind of a personal question is, like, what brought you back to academia? You were doing such amazing work in the geospatial community.
Yeah, Chris, no, I appreciate that. So again, just want to say thank you for having me on the podcast. Anytime I can have a platform to talk about GIS, I take it because I'm so thoroughly enamored with this technology, this science. So it's great to get it out for people, get it out of, how powerful it can be. So you asked, why did I get back into academia? Quite frankly, I kind of went down the road of, and I wouldn't suggest this to any younger person, but I went down the road of corporate ladder hopping. So I spent about 3 years apiece at each company I worked at. And this concept of kind of like the quickest way to get to the top would be not actually to stay within one organization. It would be to jump around so you can leverage moving into higher positions. So over a decade or so, what that did is it got me very high up the ladder, and I got into an executive level director's position running a group of about 44 geospatial professionals. And while we were doing fantastic things, what ended up happening in my daily schedule was I became, a director, a manager of timesheets and budgets, why people couldn't come into work and, why they wanted raises. And what I wasn't doing is making maps, doing analysis, collecting data, the things that actually brought me into the industry. I had over a course of time, it just kind of flew by. And then the next thing I knew, I wasn't doing what I loved. And so I had the opportunity, the company I was working with let me, it actually helped fund some of the my schooling. And so I went back to the PhD. As you know, Chris, you helped me out with that. So again, always thank you. But so I was able to do both at the same time. And so it was a little bit of an easier transition to go from, the private sector back into academia full time, because I could kind of do both. But yeah, it was because I wanted to get back into what I loved doing and teaching. I'm sort of an outgoing person. Teaching is a huge part of what I do, not just the research aspect. And, I had been doing some classes on the side at MAS GIS. I had come down and worked with you guys down in Tucson. But it wasn't fulfilling what I needed. So, yep, it was time to go back and get involved again.
Yeah, and you're an amazing teacher, so I'm glad to have you back in academia, but I do agree, and both you and I can tell the people coming out of master's degrees, stay in the industry, you'll make better money. Don't come back to academia. We don't make the money. We do it more for the passion of teaching and research. But that skill set that you got in industry is really helping the School of Design and the School of Geography up there at ASU, because I feel like it's that practical, real world learning that a lot of academics just simply, we don't learn how to do those things until you're out in the field, and then you get that thing. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background and training let's start actually even outside of school, and then maybe how the school might have helped you, improve your standing in the GIS community.
Absolutely. So I often will pitch myself as sort of a hyper interdisciplinarian. I've had a lot of different gigs at different places, and I've studied a lot of different things. So in undergraduate, for an example, I studied history, anthropology, and education. I got lucky enough that I was able to do an overseas field school, and I ran some GIS in a total station doing an archaeological dig. So I was exposed to GIS in undergrad briefly, but then I go out and do some field work. I loved it. I came back, graduated, and then started being a professional archaeologist working for cultural resource management firms. What really kept me really interested, however, wasn't necessarily the archaeology and the history components, but it was the geospatial technologies and the mapping that we utilized to write the reports. I loved going out and collecting the data. That's part of, and as as we've known each other over a decade, you've always known I've gone out and collected data, whether it's with GPS or drones or LiDAR. That's kind of where my bag has been. Well, long story short, I ended up in Arizona. Had a crew chief that was talking all about Arizona and how great it was. And, there's all this vast open spaces of land and people need to manage this land. That means lots of, mapping opportunity. So I moved out here and started working for a local Tempe firm, doing an environmental consulting firm, and went back at that time and did my MA as GIS. So I was working as an archaeologist / GIS person, going back to school. And I had a really good boss at the time, Eric, and a couple really great colleagues in the GIS group that really helped me grow. But what was cool is I was going to class, quite frankly, one of your classes at night. And so I was able to take real world experience and what's coming in a classroom and theory and concepts. And really what was able to do is take the two and it's kind of synergized together symbiotically, and it really helped. After the master's program, I had reached out to the MAS GIS group at ASU, and I had offered to try to help. So I kind of just took a leap, and you guys took a leap of faith in me. And so I started teaching, and what happened was at that point, I've basically taught on the side in some capacity. And that's what's been filling my soul. And I kind of, at that time I was in the private world doing that, just working as much as I could. Eventually went back and did my PhD while working on the private side as well. But I think the key for me was what's interesting about GIS, and I think it's maybe a little different than some of the other hard sciences and maybe some of the other soft sciences or social sciences, is that GIS is, GIS sciences can go, gosh, you could do 10 years in school and do that your whole life. There's a part of GIS that's very utilitarian and applicable to what is happening in life today. Sometimes as academics, we can get a little lost in theory and stuff, but there's a very real need today that cities and companies need GIS to make better informed decisions, to be more friendly to the environment, to maintain utilities, whatever the case may be. GIS fits into pretty much every dang aspect of life on our planet. And so what's neat is there's that application sense. And so I was able to take GIS and roll it out for the sake of construction and engineering and landscape architecture, but at the same time continue to foster some of those educational components. So this is a widely random sort of answer, but the key is, again, GIS is able to attack both academia and support that, but also in the private world. And I was able to support both. I think what's interesting is bringing some of the experiences from the private side, industry side to academia. I think at times I may have an advantage and I can help some of the students, because here it is. And I guess this is what I'm trying to get at here. Most of the students are probably coming out with undergraduate degrees or master's degrees, and they're not going to consider doing a PhD. I think MAS GIS only rolls over one student a semester, to the PhD program, while, 20 to 40 students graduate and go out into the marketplace. And so, being able to bring the experiences and teach some of the soft skills that are associated with GIS, how to be professional and how to work GIS in collaborative groups, and being able to be a team player and empathetic and sympathetic, all the things, it being inclusive, and again, being able to relay some real world experience so that they can come out of school not just knowing a technical skill, but knowing those soft skills that will help them be successful. So yeah, kind of all over the place on that, but I feel very blessed that I've been able to find this world that has allowed me to do both. But the reality is, I think most people learning GIS need to learn, very real skills they can employ on day one when they walk into that job.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point, and something that I've always admired in you in your career, which is you're extremely proficient on your hard skills, and you're very passionate about that, but you're also an amazing example to hold up to students and alumni of networking and soft skills. And if anybody listening to the podcast wants to see somebody that knows how to work LinkedIn, take a look at Nik's LinkedIn page, because you're awesome, dude. But I wanted to say or ask you, like, for somebody just starting out in the field or trying to get their foot in there, we talked that networking is important. What have you learned about like networking yourself over your career, and how it's benefited you, and like what do you do, and where would somebody want to start?
That's great. Couple of good questions there. So just to be cheesy, the old colloquial saying of it's not always what you know, but who you know. There's some very, very real truth to that. And, my parents often would tell me another silly saying, but it stuck close to home. And that was the concept of never burning a bridge. And so even though maybe I was hopping from company to company, one thing I insisted was I always left on the best of terms. I always did the hardest, best work I could. And I always maintain those relationships. And quite frankly, every boss that I have, I still have a very good relationship with them, to the point that if I ever needed to fall back on another position, I could. Or now they reach out to me and they need, my students to fill those positions. So it's worked out. So what I mean by it's not always what you know, it's who you know. If you can be the best designer, GIS scientist, quite frankly, you can be the best painter. But if you can't go get the jobs and you can't figure out the ways to insert yourself into the industry, your voice could be lost. And so networking is so important. And in the undergraduate classes, I always will tell my students to get involved, make sure you do some internships or look for local opportunities, or either local or state opportunities for the different organizations that support the industry. So if you're in landscape architecture, there's, landscape, the LAF, so the Landscape Architecture Foundation, or the AZL, Arizona Landscape Architecture Association, AZLA. Go join that. They usually have monthly meetings. There are professionals that have been doing this for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. They get up and they talk. They teach about what their experiences are. And what you'll find, too, there's, at least what I have experienced in these professions, there's a desire to help continue the profession to move forward. And so there's always this sort of mentoring that happens, and maybe it's not explicit, but you can go, and if you're in the GIS community, for example, there's AGIC, the Arizona Geographic Information Council, that has a yearly conference. It's coming up here. It's virtual. So it's very easy to get a hold of, to insert yourself and do some networking. There are organizations in here, local Phoenix organization, started by a kind of GIS legend. You may be familiar with James Fee. James Fee started Phoenix Geo. And so that's a monthly meeting where for happy hour once a month, because of COVID, we do it virtually now. But, we get together and people talk and pass along information and new tips and tricks. Or, gosh, there's the survey community, the United Surveyors of Arizona, or Arizona Professional Land Surveying Association. So there's, ways to insert yourself there. There's just so many ways to get networked. And I can tell you this, I've applied for a lot of jobs over the years. I'm 36, and, so I've had some experience applying to things. The other thing is, when I was working in that corporate job, I also had to hire a lot of people. So I probably run 1,000 interviews at least, and hired and had some luck and not so much luck. I'll tell you what, it's always easier to get a job when it's not a blind hire. And what I mean by that is if you've networked and you know somebody in a division, or if you've got somebody that can speak for your quality of professionalism and what you can do within the organization, or perhaps you've literally, you ready for this? So I got a job once. Here we go. Every joke starts with, I walked into the bar and. So here's the joke. I was working at a place and I was 24, 25 years old. So that local firm I mentioned earlier, it was like a Thursday happy hour time. I went to the bar downtown off of Priest. It's an Ohio State Buckeye bar for whatever reason. I walked into the bar and there was like 5 people in there. And like I said, I was just having a happy hour, a beer. And there were 2 guys talking about GIS at the bar. Well, I just was flabbergasted. First off, I just didn't know people would talk about GIS at the bar. So I walked right up to them, shook their hands, and I just inserted myself into the conversation. 3 weeks later, I was working at a friend of one of those people's company, and I had left the job, and I had found a new career. I was at Desierto Verde, and it put me into a different trajectory. And so the whole thing was just talking to somebody, and I randomly overheard a conversation about GIS, and that networking opportunity has, quite frankly, led me to, some of the paths today where I'm on, where, I've come to make a love for trees, and that company was all about trees, and I was able to get my certified arborist. So networking is just so important, and getting out and putting your name out there. And, here's another just friendly tip for everybody. Sorry, I'm going to go on a diatribe. Chris, I brought my soapbox with me. Sorry. It's the early part of the semester, so I'm listening like this rhetoric mode. For all the people out there that are going to be applying for jobs or internships, or you're thinking about networking, just remember that you have a digital image. And what you put up on social media, what you post, what you email, what you text can it can be a detriment if you're not paying attention to that. And what I mean by this is every hiring manager will Google search your name. And if you've never Google searched your name, you should check it out. And if things pop up when you Google search your name, inappropriate things, it could be a detriment, and you could potentially get passed up on a job because, you've got a picture of you partying or something silly. So just be cognizant that everything you go, like your online presence is very big. And if you are doing networking, I highly suggest that you disconnect your personal social media platforms from your professional social media platforms. And we can get into a long discussion on why that is. But again, I would hate for you to stub your foot before you even got into the industry just because of, sharing something silly. Turn on the news, people post stuff and they can lose their jobs. And so, or they put something in an email that you can never take back and that digital record stays. And so positive social networking, awesome. Go for it. Get involved. It's awesome. Do it. If you're doing the personal side, just be careful. So, yeah, networking's huge, Chris, and never burn a bridge. And that means just never assume you may not need or want or could help this person down the road. And the industry of GIS, gosh, it's really small. It's small, but it's huge. There's millions of us, but for whatever reason, we all know each other. And I mean, Chris can attest to this, I'm sure. You've had a lot of students over the years, and we all network, right? And we scratch each other's back. So there's an amount of family orientatedness in GIS as well. So that would be my recommendation. Yeah, you got to get good grades. But the truth is, most firms will teach you what you need to know at the company. So getting the job, interviewing well, networking, getting the opportunity to even interview, those soft skills, I think those are very important.
Yeah, I always liked the GIS industry because I feel, I say it's the show me, don't tell me industry. You got to show your skills, but if you don't have the reputation that comes with it or the manner, the certain professionalism, they can take somebody with lesser skills, but with a better business mannered with them. But I wanted to get back to one thing you just mentioned, because with your experience, I know a lot of people would like to hear about what do I do to prepare for an interview? Like, what are some of Dr. Smilovsky's tips and tricks for getting, preparing for an interview, what to expect, what not to do, those kinds of things. It's a real, I think, a skill to do interviews right.
Oh gosh, definitely. So, caveat to this is everybody has their own opinion on interviewing and how they can get jobs. So this is my opinion. I have some colleagues that would maybe not agree with all of these things. So in my opinion, number one, it starts with a professional resume and or portfolio. So if you're in undergraduate, you need to be already thinking about your future career. So if you're doing a project in a GIS class and your final deliverable is really awesome, consider that could go into our portfolio. Making sure that your resume is highly professional. There's no grammar mistakes. It's very written at a collegiate level. You've got examples that can back up what you've done. Potentially you don't have much experience in quote unquote the real world yet, so you can showcase your schoolwork. If you walk in with a nice printed resume to hand to somebody, maybe even a hard piece of paper, and it's very, very nice and well put together with a portfolio, you're already a step ahead. I can tell you, when you're a hiring manager and you have 200 resumes on your desk, the reality is somebody might only spend 5, 20, 30 seconds on your resume. And if you don't make it past the first glance, they won't even probably read, halfway down the page. And so setting yourself up for success with a resume portfolio, I recommend that. There's tons of resources online. I would suspect at ASU, for an example, we have resume and portfolio, I don't know what they call them, technical workshops all the time. So there's resources I'm sure U of A will have that you can go join, and people will help you do that. There is some science behind a resume too. But in terms of interviewing, okay, number one, I'm going to make a plug. Chris, before we were just randomly talking about Harvard, there is a Harvard professor that I'm absolutely in love with. She's a psychologist that works in the business department. Her name is Dr. Amy Cuddy. I always show one of her TED Talks to my classes as well. And she talks about a concept of faking it until you are it. So she's done some science where our bodies and how our bodies act influence our brain. So flashback, you're going to be like, Nick, that had to do with your dissertation research a little bit too. Yeah, I mean, the body is connected to the brain. So we know scientifically that the brain can influence the body, and we now know too that the body can influence the brain. So she has proven beyond reproach, scientifically in peer-reviewed articles and journals, that you can basically do some power posing before your interview. She recommends walk into the bathroom and get there and raise your hand and tell yourself in the mirror that you're going to do great. And there is a physiology that actually will change the chemicals in your brain. She's proven it that even people that can't see, when they do something in triumph, they'll raise their hand. So go into the bathroom, give yourself some pep talk. That will actually get your brain chemicals moving into kind of, I don't want to say aggressor, but it will move you into kind of a confident role. She says most people will sit, have you ever been in an interview, they're in the lobby, right? And they're sitting and they're very curled up and they're hunched over and they're recessed and they're scared. And what that does is it starts other chemicals in your body pushing you towards something else. So number one, check out, you can just Google search, you'll find Dr. Cuddy. She's awesome. Check out that YouTube video. She actually mentions to share the science to other people, that your brain can trick you. So if you for one, I can't get that job, I don't know how to do that, the defeatist attitude changes everything, and you've gotta stand up for yourself. So number one, do that. The other thing to me is punctuality. Never show up late. My dad used to say, if you're not early, you're late. If you showed up for my interview and you were 5 minutes late, you are already out the door. So being early. Another personal opinion I have, you probably remember a guy, Chris, named Guddy. I had a conversation with Guddy about a decade ago. He's a friend of ours, a programmer, I think in the Bay Area nowadays. But we were talking about what to wear to an interview. In Arizona, it's 120 degrees sometimes, and I was making the case that I'm old school. So I get, the church clothes out of the the dry storage because I don't wear it very often. But in my mind, an interview is a one-time opportunity for you to put yourself and showcase yourself. And in my mind, you want to have all your best feet forward. I mean, you wouldn't show up to a car show with your car not washed, right? And so I know it's a different world we live in, but appearance, people can judge, right? And so being professional on time, I'm not saying you have to wear a coat and a tie in 120-degree weather, but you probably don't want to show up in a tank top, because it shows that you care. So that's another thing. In terms of the interview itself, soft skills. Again, you can talk about technical stuff, but most interviews aren't about, do you know how to click the buttons in ArcGIS? Like, they're actually about, tell me about a project where you were confronted with diversity in a group. Tell me how you overcame said diversity. Be prepared with some experiences in kind of your background of your head, like that you can pull out success stories. In fact, be ready to explain a not success story. People like to see how we operate in trying times, right? The other thing is be prepared with some of the buzzwords. Understand what the company or organization you're going into interview is all about. I couldn't stand if somebody came into interview and I said, why do you want to work at said company? Oh, and they'd sit there, well, GIS is cool. Well, I'm not looking for GIS is cool. What I want to see is that you've done some research, you've gone to the website, you've seen who the principals are, you've seen what kind of work is done, what kind of personal motto the company has. Are they sustainable? Are they into lead AP stuff? Are they, there's something to be said about somebody who comes into an interview prepared, knowing what they're interviewing for. It's like trying to join a family, right? So understanding that, also having some questions prepared. What's interesting is most people think that interviews are all about the company interviewing the person. It's not the case all the time. Sometimes it's the company wants to hear what the person has to ask. Like, go in and ask the interviewer and put them on their feet, right? And reverse the situation and say, could you tell me how said company has been successful in the past? Like you can, and all of a sudden they're like, everybody loves to talk about themselves. Oh, well, let me tell you how X company can do it. And then, they go. But so those are some tips. Here's another tip. It's okay to say that you don't know. If they ask you a question and you can't answer it, don't fumble your way through it. Don't lie about it. It's okay to say, you know what? I don't technically know the answer, but here's a way I would figure it out, right? I'm going to go and talk to this person. I'm going to look it up on this online. But, unfortunately, I just don't, people can see through lies pretty quickly. Again, these people do this all the time and they're professional at it. So just be cognizant of that. And, one last thing and I'll be quiet. So in the world of COVID and even before COVID, telecommuting is on the rise. So it's kind of a paradigm shift. I think we've all realized we don't have to go into the office every single day. And so a lot of first round interviews will take place online or through a phone. And so just be prepared for that as well. Make sure your technology is working. If you're doing a Zoom interview, make sure that, if you've got your camera on, there aren't, say, things in your room you wouldn't want to show your future employer. I've seen some interesting things where you're like, whoa, maybe you shouldn't have that there. But again, you want to put your best feet forward, and, interviewing digitally is a little different. And so just be aware of that. If practice makes perfect. Going and getting some of that resource help from your university, or even going to somebody you respect that's got some experience beyond you, and hey, will you run a mock interview with me? Get comfortable with yourself and your own skin and how you're going to answer questions. And again, don't worry about the technical as much. I think it's the soft stuff. It's how are you going to work in a team? How are you going to be successful with people? How do you work in diversity? And so, I think those are a few of the things. And just put your best foot forward, right? You never want to walk out of an interview and go to yourself, oh my gosh, I should have done X. So those are some things, Chris. I don't know. Hopefully I answered a little bit, but it's not all doom and gloom. I promise. There's a little bit of practice makes perfect, and help, apply to a lot of places. statistically speaking, don't just assume to apply to one place, like apply to 10, and then you can, work through those. So.
Yeah, get yourself out there. That's a huge part of it too. And what you're going to learn more from failure than success. Yeah, my story was first job I got as a professor. I applied for 64 jobs and I got the 65th one. That completely was not suited for me, but I had networked for that position in a very roundabout way. So yeah, no, I completely agree with you on those fronts. I was going to mention too, most universities, and especially University of Arizona and Arizona State University, have career services departments, what Nick was mentioning, where they do mock interviews, where they do resume building skills. And if you're even an alumni and are out of school, it's like talking to your former faculty, talking to people in the industry. Ask them to look at your resumes, ask them to talk to you about what's the interview process like. A lot of people are willing to be mentors in the industry, and that's also part of the networking process. So that's a very good recommendation, Nick. I know that you've worked for a number of different companies, as you mentioned, and the diversity, you've kind of jumped even between, you've stayed with GIS, but jumped to different thematic fields in GIS in the Phoenix, Arizona, and elsewhere. But I guess I'm kind of curious on it. Did the skill set that you needed within GIS, like what kind of tasks and GIS skills did you need for jobs change as you moved? And maybe you could end the comment with some of the work that you're doing with Bad Elf, which is really fun for me to have learned about recently.
Yeah, so I think the short answer is a good foundation in GIS can take you into all of those different thematic industries. And that's what's awesome about GIS. I mean, if you drink the Esri Kool-Aid and whatever the case may be, ArcMap works the same whether you're working for a municipality, a large oil and gas company, or SpaceX. So I think there is some commonality. If you learn a good foundation of GIS, you understand projections and you understand cartographic rules, and maybe you learn some Python or some model builder. Those core concepts, those core technical skills can launch into each different field. Now, what you'll need to be is open-minded when you get into the other field, that they may have a certain way of doing things, right? So if you do flow modeling for hydrology studies, they may do that in a specific way. And so you need to be open-minded to learn how to adapt what you know in GIS to that new formula, so to speak. But yeah, I didn't technically really need to relearn. Now, okay, so when I was in the utility world, I had to learn utility plans and I had to learn, the aspects of that industry. But the GIS, a utility plan looks really complicated, but guess what? It's still made with points, lines, and polygons. So you may, if you do, ecological studies, you may need to know, okay, so if you're going to go out on a field crew and you're going to go do condor studies, you may need to know what you're looking for to map a condor, right? Like the birds. But no, the central core, what GIS does, it's awesome. It's like the cog in the middle of the wheel, right? And all the spokes are within your wheelhouse, quite frankly. I love the way GIS has the ability to like wear the hat and just change the hat, right? In today's world, gosh, GIS is just permeating every part of basically every industry. So it's a great opportunity for us, people that are in this space. And then, I'm sorry, your second question, kind of to follow up, was what again?
Well, you're doing some interesting work with Bad Elf as well.
Okay, so long story short, my wife decided to go back and do her PhD, and so blessings for her. She's the smart one in the family that will, actually help save lives. I just like GIS. But so with her going back, I decided that I wanted to work a little bit more. And as you know, in academia, you can only do so much. So I had contact with a company called Bad Elf. Now, Bad Elf GPS has been actually used at ASU in the MAS GIS program for a lot of years now. And so I had experience using them. At some of the companies I worked for, we also had that same technology. And so I got to be familiar with one of the guys over there, a gentleman named Larry Fox. Again, through networking, right? He was a Trimble guy. We had met there, and long story short, years later, here we are. And I was just talking with him, and he was, hey, we need somebody like you to be an advocate for GIS. I'm like, you need me to do what? He goes, well, we need you to talk about GIS to people. Oh, sweet. So I'm going to get paid to teach about GIS. And so it was a very easy moment to say, you know what, I can hitch my wagon on this. And so for the last about 2 years, but actually about a year, I've been doing consulting work with Bad Elf. And Bad Elf is a GNSS company. So if you're not familiar with that term, that means global navigation satellite system. So it's a larger term than, say, GPS, where GPS is actually referring to a constellation of satellites that the United States runs. But there's also the European Union and Galileo. Russian Federation runs the GLONASS system, and the Chinese run their system called BeiDou. And so when you have, there's also other systems with India and Japan, but nonetheless, this company creates cost-affordable GNSS solutions, and they are heavily in the GIS market. And so what's really neat is they've had this new product that they've been developing, which I've actually been part of that development for the last few years, of this new unit called the Bad Elf Flex. So here's a short plug, www.bad-elf.com/flex. The Flex is a new GNSS. So if you've been in the industry, you're like, oh man, just another GPS unit, who cares? Well, you should care, because number one, it's way different in the fact that it's about a fraction of the cost. And so what Bad Elf has been able to do is change the business model, kind of more on an online Amazon. Don't need as many resellers. You can go right to the source. So we can cut out a large piece of the cost. And so for only a few $1,000s, you can get a survey grade, a fully engineering grade survey piece of equipment that interacts with GIS very, very easily. Now, there used to be this huge fight between surveyors and GIS people, and we bonked our heads for years, and it still is happening. Surveyors would often joke that GIS stands for Get It Surveyed. And I'd hate to tell you what the GIS people think of the surveyors, but hopefully that'll get better. But with a unit like this, it's a paradigm shift in the fact that now the GIS people can go collect the survey grade data. And so the authoritative data can now be in the hands of any GIS division, group, or org across the country, or the world for that matter. And so what I do with Bad Elf is I work with universities, I work with nonprofits, I work with different companies, and I help them onboard this new technology. I go to conferences and I write articles and do story maps on how to connect your, say, Esri art collector or Survey 123 or Quick Capture, or soon to be what's called field maps, which we're pretty excited about, Esri's new release. I help people get those things set up. So like a couple weeks ago, I was on the horn with the Atlanta Botanical Gardens, and I did a 3-hour Zoom session helping 7 biologists and ecology people learn how to do some GIS. So it's been awesome, and Bad Elf works pretty remotely, and so a couple days a week I'm doing my ASU thing, and then a couple days a week I do Bad Elf, and sometimes I can leverage the Bad Elf stuff to show the students, and so it's been great to be able to bring some of that cool technology in for class. But additionally, I've been able to use some of that technology in some of the research I'm part of at ASU as well. So quick plug here, I am part of a grant that it's called the West Mesa River Community Heat Action Project. So we're looking at marginalized and marginalized communities in Mesa, and we're looking at heat problems. And so heat is obviously in Arizona is a big issue. But heat-related illness and death and inequality, social justice wrapped around heat. And so, but more specifically trees. And so again, somewhere in my past, I learned the tree thing around GIS, and I networked with people, and now I know the heat thing with GIS. And so I'm part of a research team where we're going out and surveying, trees and canopy and the effects of shade on built infrastructure, and then inevitably how that built infrastructure influences people. And I mentioned it earlier, my dissertation, which Chris was one of my advisors on for everybody out there. So thank you again, Chris. Never burn a bridge, especially when they're your advisor, when they call you to get on a podcast. But Chris knows that I studied cognitive mapping, and again, how the brain works with mapping and how the behavior influences decision making and vice versa. And so it's neat to have all these kind of different backgrounds, again, that hyper interdisciplined approach, and I can bring all that in even with a bad elf GPS, but also what I've learned, and go collect trees and do this type of research. So I feel very blessed that I've found a sort of niche, right now to so I can help my wife get through school, but also just help the community, not just locally, but across the board. So yeah, that's kind of my weird. I'm in academia, but not. I don't know. Some people might call me crazy. I work a lot. I joke. I eat, sleep, insert other verbs into GIS. It's my bag. My wife and I got married. She does the same sort of stuff. All of my pictures at our wedding had lat longs on the pictures. Like, I eat this up. And if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. So I don't know. I've always been passionate about mapping, and it's been a ride.
Yeah. So you mentioned one project in Mesa, but I thought maybe we'd talk a little bit about a project that with you and Bad Elf helped me out on too, which was quite fun.
Oh, no, I heard some unfortunate news the other day.
And we did, yes. So Nick had and Bad Elf actually volunteered their time, and Nick brought his whole ASU class down to do this, where we were doing 3D mapping of Old Tucson Studios, which unfortunately has been closed now for COVID and might not reopen. They don't know what they're going to do with it, which is a little bit scary. But and I know that you have LinkedIn stories about the work that you did with me on that, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you and Larry did down at the main studio, and then the fun day that we had with the students out at Mescal. And that was, that was quite an adventure. Getting locked up in the jailhouse was part of it too, right?
Right. Yeah, I'll be honest. I have watched more Western films in the last year or so than I had probably in the last decade from being down there. But Chris is discussing a project, a film study project, actually, where Chris was working with a group of researchers looking at the old Tucson Film Studio, which is where, if you're unfamiliar, if you've ever basically watched any very famous Western film, there's a really good chance it was filmed there, and all the big names like, the Clint Eastwoods of the wood, back all the, every famous person, you name it, they've been there. So Chris went and had a mission of, number one, going and researching the documentation of the site. So getting all the film records and getting a great base foundation. Next day, Chris wanted to map the studio and kind of have a map over time. So kind of like a change detection analysis of how the studio has transformed over the years. But additionally, wanted to collect some three-dimensional kind of high-end GIS data. And so we went down with Bad Elf, Larry Fox and I, and we laid out some survey control, which is a fancy way to tie down aerial data from a drone, right? So in the world of geography, we have projections that make things fit on a flat surface that's actually round, so I can remember back to Chris's geodesy classes 10 years ago. But it's all about fitting these data onto the surface. And so we set up ground control with the Bad Elf and collected that. And then we used a drone. So I happen to be FAA certified, same with Larry, our Part 107. So following all the rules and guidelines behind that. But we were able to fly a drone and collect some very high accuracy imagery. We also worked with another company, SLAM, we were able to collect terrestrial-based LiDAR to create some really neat products for Chris's students to do some analysis. And so it was neat. It was a couple days where we got to go. Actually, the coolest part, real quick, was at Mescal, the second site we mapped. We were able to meet with an on-site historian, and he had this book, and the book was like a treasure trove of 50 years of like historical photos of every famous Western actor you can imagine. And he walked us through the site. And so we got this whole socio-temporal historical approach of, these are the buildings, this is where people were standing, this is what was happening, this, and it was just this really neat immersive project. And for the humanities, and film is such a critical part of humanity at this point, right? Whether it's major cinema or, gosh, TikTok videos today. And so Chris's project of mapping this, and then eventually the hope was to get this out digitally to the world, so people in India could experience this cool stuff. But it was a neat again, merging of academia, multiple universities, multiple professors, but also multiple technologies and private firms, and it all kind of coming together. And honestly, it's like the perfect storm. I wish that happened, more regularly across the board. I think we'd probably have a little bit better world we live in. But yeah, it was a super neat project. And again, just going back to networking, keeping in touch with Chris over the years. Chris, pings me one day and says, "Hey, I've got this opportunity. Are you interested at all?" And next thing I know, I'm sweating in southern Arizona, collecting data, and it was awesome. So,
well, thank you for that too, because it was one of those, as you mentioned, humanities projects where there's absolutely no money. We're doing it for the love of the project, and getting students out at the Mescal site to do some on-site data collection. It is very memorable too, and those are the fun events that you remember. And for me, that was an example of networking, not burning my bridges with alumni like yourself, and keeping things going. But hey, thank you for spending some time with us today, Nik. It was great to catch up and hear about your work and your passion for the industry. And I encourage everybody to check out Nik at the Arizona State University as well as online. He does a number of wonderful posts and has some, we look forward to seeing more of your research in the future, and you'll see him at conferences all over the country and around the world. I know that we both are like dying for the pandemic to end so we can both meet up in Germany.
I was just going to say, when are we getting to Germany, Chris?
and go to the global conferences very soon. So thanks for joining us, Nik.
Thank you, Chris. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, and I appreciate the time. And for all the students and people out there in the GIS community, we love y'all. Love to hear from you. If you ever need something, we are a family, so please feel free to reach out. So thanks, Chris. Really appreciate it.
See ya.